Jay.
We'll be talking about the technology and communication sector. So first up is information technology. So as of January 31, 2019, and the IT sector takes up 19.9% of the S&P 500. So the sector performance, S&P 500 had a 50.61% return over 5 years, while the technology SPDR, which is the S&P 500 sector for technology, went up 89.94% the last 5 years. So the XLK beat the S&P 500 by 39.33% in terms of returns for the past 5 years. So overall, that technology has been doing pretty well. For the industries in the information technology sector, there's IT services, software, communication equipment, technology, hardware, storage and peripherals, electronic equipment, instruments and components, semiconductors and semiconductor equipments. I think everything is pretty self-explanatory. Maybe semiconductors, those are essentially the chips that you use in your phones and your laptops and your computers and stuff. Electronic equipment, technology, hardware, IT services, and software. I'll be talking about software more right now. So software industry, notable software companies are companies like Microsoft, Oracle, Adobe. Those are like essentially the opposite of hardware. So they're applications that you use in certain things like your computers, your phones. Some of the software companies that we hold in our SIF portfolio would be Synopsys and Paylocity. I think Paylocity, if I recall it correctly, it's essentially like a payroll system software. Synopsys is, I think they do semiconductor applications. Is that the one that does like semiconductor applications and stuff? Just to create semiconductors and other hardware. So they use the software for that. So overall, the technology sector and the software industry they both have like a cyclical approach to it. So what that means is that essentially it follows the overall trend of the market. So a big part of it is because of low interest rates. So if there's low interest rates, usually that's what the technology sector likes, because it has big R&D, high growth. So it really wants low interest rates and it really helps them. So overall, it's a cyclical company and a cyclical industry. So some of the special metrics that I think are important to look at when you're looking at a software industry would be its number of downloads, because obviously a lot of software are free and they rely solely on like ads or premium membership and stuff. So number of downloads and their user retention are really important things to look at, because obviously it looks a lot of how much people are using the application and the software. Average and daily monthly users is another thing if you want to look at, and as well as number of premium subscribers. So like I said, like the free, just like the term called freemium or something like that, where essentially they bring you in using free tactics, and essentially but their main goal is to actually make you subscribe to make so that they can make revenue through premium subscription. So some of the key drivers of profitability would be subscriber growth and active user growth. It kind of goes hand in hand together. You want to look at the subscriber growth for certain software and active user growth as well. So some of the trends that software has would be artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence, like as we all know, it's pretty some serious stuff. Not only are some software based around AI, but AI is actually now being used to create software, which might, in the future replace software engineers, or at least be used to create certain kinds of software. So that's another trend that has to be looked at for sure. Another thing would be blockchain. Talked about cryptocurrency a bit, but even though blockchain essentially is the technology that's used to create cryptocurrency. And although a lot of analysts think that cryptocurrency isn't really a very reliable source, which I think it isn't, I think blockchain in general is something that will stay even though crypto won't. Because I think blockchain is really important. Companies like Oracle, Facebook, a lot of them are actually starting to look at blockchain as a, they're trying to look at blockchain because blockchain essentially is like a peer-to-peer, it's like a peer-to-peer connection through different computers. Essentially what it can do is that it can save your data and your information really safely and really securely without other people accessing. Like for example, like cloud. Like Apple has like Apple. Technically, they still have information of your cloud. They can still have access to your cloud account and stuff. With blockchain, it's possible to actually have it where it's only the person who owns these keys, only them will have access to that and no one else. So that's one thing that should be looked at because it's definitely a trend that that will be relevant in the future. So for the Porter's Five Forces, so we have here new entrants. New entrants would be high. That's mainly because when it comes to software, it's not really that expensive to get into software. What's important about software is the intellectual property. So, if you have a good idea, it's not really very hard to fund that idea. It's all about the idea when it comes to software. So that's why we put new entrants high, because a lot of new entrants will come in. Which goes hand in hand with rivalry. Rivalry will be high as well because there's a lot of big and small companies and players that will compete, which will make the rivalry very intense. As well as the switching costs are very low, which means that if you find a better application, it's not really very hard to move. So it's very focused on the consumer, which in turn makes the power of buyers very high because, like I mentioned, switching costs are low, which makes buyer power high. And buyers are price sensitive as well when it comes to software price and features as well. You have the substitutes. There are really no substitutes when it comes to software because software is pretty much the only thing that's used. There's maybe like some physical substitutes to software, like mechanical things for certain things, but it's usually more inferior. So I wouldn't say there's any substitutes to software. And finally, we have power suppliers. So mainly when we talk about suppliers, that would be, for software, it would be like software engineers and professionals. For them, they're pretty expandable for the most part because there's a limit when it comes to software professionals. They can only do so much because, like I said, it's all about the intellectual property and what they're actually building. So, things like outsourcing would be a factor for that as well. You can get like a lot of engineers from, let's say, India and places like that. So overall, it would be low for the power suppliers. And yeah, that's basically it for software and you want to, yeah, sure. So the next is with Jay for communication.
So I did my second overview on communication services. So the communication services accounts for 10.3% of the S&P 500. So the XLC was founded last year in June. So I wasn't able to pull up a 5-year report. So since June 2018, XLC went down by 7%, and the S&P 500 went down 1.6%. So the XLC is currently not doing that well compared to the S&P 500. So the industry groups within communication is telecommunication services, and media and entertainment. And within those industry groups, there's diversified telecommunication system, wireless telecommunication system, media, entertainment, and interactive media and services. So I decided to focus on interactive media services, which is basically social media platforms and online review companies that make their revenue off of pay-per-click advertising. So in the XLC holdings, most interactive media services is the majority of the holdings, and Facebook, Alphabet, and Netflix are one of the biggest companies within the XLC. So companies like in the interactive media services, success is measured through active users and ad revenue. This is Facebook's monthly active users. So you can see it's growing, so that'd be a good sign. Profitability is by user growth, because if you want to have your ad on Facebook, companies like Facebook, you want a high user growth so they look at your ads. I would say this, I would say companies within this industry is counter-cyclical and defensive because, like even if the market's doing really bad, like if we're in recession, people are still gonna use social media and websites to like browse and stuff, because you don't have to actually purchase something.
What about the ad revenue? Since the business model is really predicated on generating ad revenue, do you think the Facebook or Google will have consistent ad revenue during? Recessions?
Probably not, so it's probably slightly, so, but I feel like that, there's so many
Overall,
ads.
it's still
Yeah.
pretty defensive.
So some of the trends that are important right now is voice-enabled digital assistant, virtual reality and augmented reality. Shopify is like a service that a company gives to sell products. So it's like you can like create a website with Shopify and then put your ad on like Facebook and sell items through there. So for the Porter's five forces, I would say there's a lot of new entrants because it's pretty easy to create a website or app, but it's pretty hard. I would say it's hard to get like to the top because there's a lot of big companies at the top that are competing with each other, like Facebook, Google, and Snapchat and Instagram. Or I guess Instagram's owned by Facebook. Power of suppliers is pretty high because your business model is basically run on ads. And ads is like the only way you can make money off. And power of buyers, I would say it's pretty high too because one wrong move and you can like, and if you get like a bad review or anything, like Facebook had like a problem a couple months ago with privacy issues. So if like something bad happens, then like people don't trust the product, the company anymore and stuff like that. And substitutes, yeah, there's a lot of different ways to connect over the internet. I would say it's Medium, but I wouldn't say there's any other substitute other than social media.
So in this category, I'd say this is a classic example of what we call a network effect, right? So a network effect means a product or service is more valuable the more people that use it, right? So, for example, like eBay is a more valuable auction platform than like some other site you may have never heard of because you know you can find buyers and sellers there. Similarly, like so all the social media type sites like Facebook is valuable because it's the standard, people will be on Facebook. Google maybe a little less so, although I'd say it has a significant network effect in terms of advertising. It's the #1 destination for advertising across the entire economy, right? But from like a user perspective, it doesn't quite have the same network effect, but in terms of advertising, it probably does. So that's both a big barrier to entry that keeps, like anyone can start a website, it would be hard to rival any of these services, so that serves as a barrier to entry, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess that covers.
Okay. I'd say one thing to think about, like, John, when you were talking about software, you seem pretty focused on like stats that have to do with like maintaining like daily average usership, etc. A lot of software is used in like a B2B application, like a business application, and then it's kind of lumpier. You're not as concerned with the daily average users because if, say, you're Oracle and you're selling software and services to a big company like Microsoft or something, like they've signed a contract, so you don't really care if like people are using it on a daily basis because they've signed the contract and they're gonna pay you no matter what. Another thing to think about, especially for the B2B space for software, and I think that's where you can see that there's a fair amount of overlap between the two industries you guys picked, right? There's some overlap in those spaces, but software also I think has more B2B in that than you see here in this sector.
So would it be, so would like number of subscriptions or number of sold, like businesses that you're selling to, would that be a better metric or?
You might wanna look at, just large contracts. So there's actually a supply chain function in Bloomberg that will tell you, if they have any large, if they have a certain, customer that's worth a certain percent of the revenue, they have to disclose that legally. So, if they have large contracts with like big businesses, that would probably be disclosed in the supply chain function in Bloomberg. So I would look at that, like the number of long-term contracts they signed. That's something that I think for B2B is probably more important, because it would be a big deal if you lost a contract that accounts for 10% of your business. Much bigger deal than losing a few individual users. But once again, it really it depends. You have to get a little more specific and see if you're looking at enterprise applications or consumer-facing applications. And then you have companies like, think about Microsoft, they do both, right? But I would say their business or enterprise applications are probably worth a lot more than their individual ones. Okay. Technology is usually viewed as a cyclical business. I think you do have a few concentrated companies that do pretty well, or have grown despite whatever the economy is doing. It doesn't seem to be super impacted by cycles in the economy, but I do think like Google, for example, and Facebook more so, that really are advertising based, do have some cyclicality to them. I had one more thought, but and this isn't, so the communications sector, it was newly created, right? Which is why you couldn't find it, because every so often the S&P 500 reshuffles kind of where how they classify companies. So that's why you couldn't find data going back 5 years on that one. So if you just looked at that, you'd be like, communications is doing really poorly. And if you look at technology, where you have 5 years of data, you'd be like, tech is doing really great. But I'm telling you, if you pick the same starting point for both those sectors, you probably see that they actually move very closely, because they are very closely related, these two sectors. That's why I have them coupled together. So don't think communications is done poorly, technology is done well. They have both probably over the long term done about equally as well, and recently there's been a fairly big sell-off in both technology and communications. Okay, there we go. Thank you guys.